For centuries, amphibians have been a source of eerie fascination for their ugliness and beauty, and for something almost human. Indeed, at times superhuman. The ancient Egyptians believed frogs were divine, and that men and women were made by the goddess Heket, who had the head of a frog. Is it the very humanness in the amphibian's body which has led us to celebrate it in picture book and fairy tale? Or is it because they are the clue to the story of evolution from water to land? The amphibian lives a double life. It starts out in water and becomes a creature living on the land. Amphibios, double life. From swimming with fins to running with legs, echoing the journey of evolution itself, the journey that has brought every one of us here. That same miracle is happening now, many times over. These creatures complete in 12 weeks the process that has taken human beings millions of years. It happens with almost every type of amphibian, with those that have tails, the salamanders, the newts and sirens, with the rarely seen Caecilian, and with the largest group of all, frogs and toads. For there are 3,500 amphibian species, measuring anything from a baby's fingernail to the length of a man's arm. And living anywhere from 4,000 meters up in the snowy peaks of the Andes to tropical rainforests, to deserts scorched by heat. Nine out of 10 are cousins of these two. The toad. Its skin is cold and soft. Yes, it is dry and knobbly. And no, despite the superstitions, it doesn't give you warts. And the frog. Its body smooth, its skin moist. For thousands of years, the frog has been a symbol of fertility and new life. The toad, with poison glands behind each eye, has long been associated with evil and witchcraft. Frogs and toads' throats pulsate because they have to pump air constantly to the lungs. Both have strong back legs. Yet only the frog is a jumper, closing its eyes for safety as it leaps. And leaping up to 36 times its own length. It's like a boy jumping the width of a soccer pitch from a standing start. Such feats turned into showbiz could pack cinemas and theaters throughout the land. Croker's College in Sacramento, California not only trains frogs to jump, it awards graduation day prizes, even to celebrity owners like Ronald Reagan and his frog Jelly Bean. One characteristic unites all amphibians, their porous skin. When they're in water, this isn't a problem because the outside is the same as the inside. The trouble comes when they go on land. Their skin is like a sieve, so all amphibians rely constantly on being near water. In Germany, this dependence on water has been used to predict the weather. The frog barometer certainly works. Down when the sun shines, and up for rain. And changes in the ozone layer have made frogs unwilling barometers of world health, killing off entire species, probably with the same ultraviolet rays that cause cancer in humans. What of frogs in the desert, where it may not rain for years? The Cyclorana frog builds itself a transparent bag and waits as long as 7 years for the rains to arrive. When the time finally comes to emerge, the bag provides its first meal. Because frogs come out to greet the rain, people used to believe they weren't born but fell to earth with the showers. And in 19th century England, people even tried catching them to prove it. The wax frog, high in the trees, retains moisture in dry weather by producing wax from its skin and coating itself. While in warm weather, the red-eyed tree frog curls up like a child, echoing its infancy, staying cool and wet. And this infant also stays wet, swimming in the pond, although already the newly hatched tadpole is losing its feathery gills, making way for lungs. And sight and hearing are developing too. Hearing is acute in frogs and toads. It's used to find a mate. The male cockweed frog has a two-part call, but the females hear only the high-pitched mating part, whereas other males hear only the lower warning tone. Good hearing is particularly important to the American bullfrog. The males are aggressive, constantly listening out for competitors, with ears like headphones, almost twice as big as their eyes. Yet amphibian eyesight differs according to environment, with eyes of all shapes and sizes. For night vision, eyes come in cat-like slits, both horizontal and vertical. There are even square pupils and heart-shaped ones, eyes all in an amazing range of colours. An incredible range considering that the amphibian only sees in two, black and white. But this snake predator has sharp sight, seeing in ultraviolet, so its intended victim needs a trick up its sleeve. And it has one, a disappearing act. The frog's skin reflects exactly the same amount of ultraviolet light as the leaf it's sitting on, so frog and plant become indistinguishable. And the snake sees an empty leaf. The power of colour. In a whole variety of emergencies, colours will be lifesavers. The amphibian will adapt to any colour for survival. It will bury itself in twigs with the hue of moss. Or gleam chocolate brown in a bed of mud. It will spread itself weed-like at the bottom of a pond. Or simply be a leaf. This dark tree frog hides in a different way, retreating unseen into the shady depths of a plant, exposing only a skull strong as a helmet. Amphibians, like insects, make great use of nature's warning colours. The bright hues of a poison dart frog's skin are a warning. The same colours were found in the headdresses of Native American peoples where one glimpse, the colour of fire, was also a warning. The golden dart, the most poisonous frog on Earth. The skin of one frog could kill 1,000 people, one of nature's most deadly weapons. At 6 weeks in the pond, those hopping back legs are growing fast. Just as 400 million years ago, some fish were at the same stage, fins turning into legs.
Double, double toil and trouble, fire burn and cauldron bubble.
400 years ago, as Shakespeare's witches stirred their steaming cauldron,
In the cauldron boil and bake, eye of newt and tower frog.
people knew well the evil ingredients of their brew.
Round about the cauldron go, in the poisoned entrails throw. Toad that under cold stone days and nights has 31 sweltered venoms sleeping got. Boil thou first in the charmed pot.
By tradition, the toad is the first and key ingredient in any spell. The powerful poison of some amphibians has long been recognized as a weapon. The Choco Indians use it to poison their blowpipe darts. But the skin of amphibians can also be used in the battle against illness. In 1986, an entire new class of antibiotics was found in the skin of an African clawed toad. They were named meganins, after the Hebrew word for shields. And even more recently, a painkiller with 200 times the power of morphine has been discovered in the skin of a frog. Against its classic enemies, spiders and snakes, the bird, the fish, the bat, the amphibian has had to devise clever means of defense. Toad of Toad Hall is famous for puffing himself up, but upon seeing the enemy, he often thinks better of it. Others use bluff more successfully and are not put off by size. So a nasty noise, backed up by an even nastier face, persuades a large opossum to back off. Changing shape is a pretense of power, so unlike Mr. Toad, some puff themselves up for real, acting much bigger than they are. Fire-bellied toads will twist themselves into mini monsters to repel a predator, and again flash that fire colour of instant danger. And a pair of false eyes at the rear can work, especially if the predator doesn't realise they're pointing the wrong way. The salamander can play dead or threaten by flashing its underside, again the familiar colour weapon, fiery yellow. It wasn't only their colour that led the Greeks to call them salamanders or fire lizards. As they fled from burning logs, people believed they were born in fire. Impossible, of course, but living in ice isn't. Some amphibians can survive in temperatures well below freezing. 2/3 of this Canadian grey tree frog's body water turns to ice, and the heart stops beating. Yet it's alive. How? By making its own antifreeze to stop itself icing up completely. When the thaw comes, the organs start working again, and it begins moving and eating normally. And being eaten. For in the 1950s, it wasn't frozen frogs, but canned ones that were all the rage.
And at Dr. Broll's Frog Canning Factory, it's spoons at the ready as Dr. Broll's Frog Tasters spring into action. Yes, they're frying frogs for food buffs from Fargo to Philadelphia, and somebody has to taste them. That's good. And whoops, he's got a frog in his throat. Never mind, it's just a small hiccup as Dr. Broyle's new enterprise leapfrogs to success.
Amphibians too will eat almost anything, provided it's living and moving. If it's got a pulse, it's lunch. All amphibians have a sticky tongue attached in the bottom of the mouth at the front, so it flicks out and over and reaches further. And that swallowing blink pushes the eyeballs back, helping to force the food down the throat. And if you swallow without looking, at least clean the food first. But a sticky tongue has its drawbacks. How do you get rid of a bombardier beetle that tastes disgusting? Some amphibians have a huge appetite. One African bullfrog devoured 14 baby cobras in one meal, a world record. Like a man swallowing 24 newborn lambs, plus the wool. In the pond at 9 weeks, this baby is already a miniature frog with lungs gulping air from the surface and front legs. Each passing hour is echoing millions of years of evolution. With one salamander, it's not maturity but shifts in the weather which change it from a water to a land animal. The adult has gills like a larva, so it can live underwater. But in times of drought, it develops lungs, taking huge gulps of air from the surface, and its gills disappear. With lungs and a body capable of life on land, its metamorphosis is complete. The lungfish has remained at a point in mid-evolution. Since that early move onto land, it has barely changed in 400 million years, and it still moves with the typical S-wriggle of a fish. Salamanders swim with the same movement, and like newts, crawl in the same way. While the frog with webbing between the toes demonstrates perfectly the term frog kick. High above the water, it's the sticky pads on the tree frog's fingers and toes and its large eyes which are crucial. And its colour, mimicking exactly the shade of the leaves, with even a bright side stripe to suggest a flash of sunlight. Yet water is still the life essential, the place of birth. So high up, the tree frog builds its nest over water, and when the tadpoles hatch, they drop straight in. For this red-eyed tree frog, survival relies on these large eyes to see and catch fast-moving insects. Here too, webbed feet have a use, far more extraordinary than in the water. This frog can glide through the branches. Webbing and almost human fingers clinging. Is it that we recognize a parody of ourselves that has brought about the sense of repulsion at the amphibian through the ages? Frogs and toads, so often the traditional image of the ugly, the rejected and the unloved. What better example than the prince in the body of a frog, longing for the kiss to set him free? In 16th century England, a woman found with a toad in her house would be instantly tried for witchcraft. Why the toad? Is it their skin? Their body? Or is there some uncanny power inside? Since ancient times, there have been countless stories of stones that broke open inexplicably. to reveal a toad, living walled up within. Witchcraft? Magic? No, hibernation. To keep warm in winter, toads will hide anywhere dark and damp until they wake to the final and most dramatic phase of the year, migration, to breed. Not all amphibians migrate, but newts do, and salamanders, and the commonest and best-known traveller, the toad. In the quest to return to their place of birth, to their breeding grounds, toads will cross anything from highways to mountains, ignore other breeding grounds along the way, and travel as far as 15 kilometers. How do they find their home pond? It remains a mystery. The greatest army of toads ever seen was not a migration, but the spread of cane toads in Australia. Brought in from America to protect the sugarcane from pests, they quickly became a pest themselves, raiding gardens and even stealing food from pets. The skin secretions of this toad are highly hallucinogenic. For a time, toad licking became a cult in California. Kiss a frog and see a prince. Lick a toad and see just about anything. The migrating toad has only one destination, the pond it left almost a year before, where 9 weeks after birth, its tail began to shrink, preparing it for life on Earth. And suddenly, as if by some sign, the pond is full. The males arrive first and croak to attract the waiting females. And always this association with birth. The ancients thought this was the strangled cry of the newborn. But no, it's the urgent call of the adult to mate. One croak can carry well over a kilometre, and there are millions of them. Other amphibians have stranger and more extreme attraction methods. Like Dracula, the vampire salamander enslaves the female by biting her neck and injecting her with an aphrodisiac. So that from that moment she will follow him slavishly until he fertilizes her eggs. Many males have no such tricks, and since they outnumber the females by about 5 to 1, they have to battle their way to the ultimate goal. Amplexus, that clinging embrace, male on female, where eggs are laid and fertilized in one act. And the laying can be anything from the single egg of the Cuban poison arrow frog to the 35,000 that one toad can lay in a year. Amphibian males can make caring fathers. The Suriname toad gently arranges the eggs on the female's back, where they'll incubate for several months until hatching. These eggs are from the Siberian salamander, the only one found in the Arctic Circle, and they're defended by the male yawning extravagantly, possibly frightening others away. perhaps strangest of all, the male Darwin's frog takes the eggs into its mouth as soon as they show signs of life. Where they grow, and then jump out as tiny froglets. And after 12 weeks, this froglet has emerged from water, just as 350 million years ago, the first amphibian was crossing the great frontier, taking the first pioneering steps on land. By the time the Egyptian frog-headed goddess was carving out her men and women, evolution had already created from the amphibian reptiles, birds, mammals, and humans. And we can almost understand those ancient Egyptians who believed that frogs were partially formed humans, and that this was simply the human embryo. For in evolution, so it was.